Ardennes Forest, Belgium, December 18th, 1944, 0430 hours. And Captain Robert Henshaw of the 512th Quartermaster Truck Regiment gripped the frozen steering wheel of his GMC CCKW as his convoy of 47 deuce-and-a-halfs crawled through the snow-choked forest road, hauling ammunition to surrounded American forces at Bastogne. When suddenly his lead scout whispered over the radio the words that would shatter everything German High Command believed about American industrial warfare. "Captain, you need to see this. The entire 7th Panzer Division is stalled, out of fuel, and we've got trucks for days." What the German officers mockingly called Lastenwagen, the American junk trucks, were about to reveal a truth that would doom the Third Reich's final gamble in the West. The Germans had superior tanks, better trained soldiers, and a tactical advantage. But they had fatally underestimated the unglamorous, mass-produced American trucks that would strangle their war machine not through firepower, but through something far more devastating: relentless, unstoppable logistics.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The contempt began long before the first American soldier set foot in Europe. In the spring of 1943, General Oberst Heinrich von Kleist, commanding the 1st Panzer Army on the Eastern Front, received intelligence reports about American military vehicle production that made him laugh out loud during a staff meeting at his headquarters in Kharkov. According to these reports, compiled by the Abwehr and considered highly reliable, American factories were producing trucks at a rate of 600,000 units per year. Not military vehicles specifically, just trucks, general commercial trucks being painted olive drab and shipped to the front. "They're sending grocery delivery vehicles to fight a war," von Kleist told his assembled officers, according to the diary of Major Friedrich Steinhoff, his operations officer. "While we design purpose-built military vehicles engineered for combat conditions, the Americans are mass-producing civilian trucks and calling it logistics. This is what happens when a nation of shopkeepers tries to fight a European war." The room erupted in laughter. These were men who had commanded panzer divisions across Poland, France, and deep into Russia. They knew warfare. They understood that war was won by superior engineering, tactical brilliance, and the fighting spirit of professional soldiers, not by assembly lines churning out cheap trucks. What von Kleist didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this shopkeeper mentality was about to revolutionize modern warfare in ways that would make their beloved panzers irrelevant. The German military's relationship with vehicles was fundamentally different from America's. In 1943, the Wehrmacht operated over 2,000 different types of trucks, half-tracks, and transport vehicles. Each one was engineered specifically for military use. Each one required specialized parts, specialized training, and specialized maintenance. The Opel Blitz, the backbone of German military transport, was a masterpiece of German engineering, built to exacting standards with a complex 6-cylinder engine that could be repaired only by trained mechanics using specific tools. Colonel Werner Osterkamp, Chief Logistics Officer for Army Group Center, wrote in his official report dated March 1943, "Our vehicle fleet represents the pinnacle of German automotive engineering. Each truck is built to withstand the rigors of military service far beyond what any civilian vehicle could endure. The reported American reliance on commercial trucks modified for military use demonstrates their industrial immaturity and will prove catastrophic when these vehicles face actual combat conditions." This report was filed, approved, and distributed throughout the German High Command. Nobody questioned it. Why would they? It made perfect sense. War required purpose-built machines, not mass-produced civilian equipment. Meanwhile,
4,000 miles away in Detroit, Michigan, a completely different philosophy was taking shape. James Mitchell, production manager at the General Motors Truck and Coach Division, stood on the factory floor in April 1943 and watched his assembly line produce one complete GMC CCKW truck every 4 minutes. 4 minutes, from raw steel to a fully functioning 2.5-ton truck ready to ship overseas. The Army wanted something complicated, Mitchell later recalled in a 1952 interview with the Detroit Free Press. They sent us specifications for a military truck that would have taken 6 months to design and 3 days to build. We told them no. We told them we could give them something simpler, something we could make tens of thousands of, something any kid who'd worked on a farm could fix with basic tools. They thought we were crazy, but we knew something they didn't. Quantity has a quality all its own. The GMC CCKW, the truck that would become known as the deuce-and-a-half, or Jimmy, was deliberately designed to be simple. Almost insultingly simple by German engineering standards. It had a 6-cylinder engine with exactly 104 horsepower, not the most powerful, not the most efficient, but cheap to produce and easy to fix. It had a 4-speed transmission when German trucks had 8. It had basic leaf spring suspension when German vehicles had complex torsion bar systems. And it could be manufactured at a rate the Germans considered impossible. By June 1943, American factories were producing 35,000 trucks per month. That's not a typo. 35,000 every single month. The Budd Company in Philadelphia was stamping out truck cabs at such speed that they had to build additional rail lines just to ship them out. The Chevrolet plant in Flint was running 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Women who'd never touched an industrial tool before were assembling complete drivetrains in under an hour. German military intelligence received these production figures and dismissed them as obvious propaganda.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The numbers are physically impossible, wrote Major Herman Balk in a classified assessment for the OKW, dated July 15, 1943. American industrial claims have always been exaggerated for propaganda purposes. Our own analysis suggests actual American truck production is perhaps 1/5 of their stated figures, which would still be impressive but nowhere near the levels they claim. More importantly, even if they somehow achieved such production rates, these hastily manufactured civilian trucks would break down within weeks under military operating conditions. This assessment was based on solid German experience. When the Wehrmacht had tried to increase production of the Opel Blitz in 1942, they discovered that cutting corners on manufacturing led to catastrophic failure rates. Trucks built too quickly developed engine problems, transmission failures, and structural weaknesses. Quality could not be rushed. This was engineering reality. Except the Americans weren't trying to build quality. They were building quantity, and they'd figured out something the Germans never understood. A simple truck that works is infinitely more valuable than a sophisticated truck that's waiting for parts. The first real test came in North Africa. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Bradley commanded the 819th Truck Company, supporting the 1st Armored Division during the Tunisian campaign in early 1943. His unit operated 48 GMC trucks, hauling supplies from the port at Algiers to forward positions near Kasserine Pass, a distance of nearly 400 miles across some of the worst terrain imaginable. "We broke those trucks in ways I didn't think possible," Bradley wrote in his after-action report dated April 1943. "We overloaded them by 50%. We drove them through sandstorms that stripped paint off metal. We ran them 20 hours a day with minimal maintenance, and they kept running. We lost 3 trucks to enemy action and 0 to mechanical failure. 0. I've never seen anything like it." The German forces facing Bradley's division had a very different experience. Hauptmann Klaus Richter commanded a transport company supporting the 10th Panzer Division during the same campaign. His unit operated 32 Opel Blitz trucks, the pride of German military engineering.
In his personal diary, captured after the war and now housed in the Bundesarchiv in Freiburg, Richter documented a very different reality. March 18, 1943. Lost 2 trucks today to engine seizure. The dust here is impossibly fine and penetrates even our superior German air filters. Requested replacement engines from division supply. Told to cannibalize other vehicles. We are now down to 28 operational trucks. March 24, 1943. Another truck lost. Transmission failure. Our mechanics work miracles, but they cannot manufacture parts that do not exist. American aircraft destroyed the supply convoy, bringing us replacements. We now have 27 trucks trying to supply an entire Panzer Division. April 2, 1943. Observed American truck convoy today through field glasses. Counted over 100 trucks. 100! And these are supposedly the inferior vehicles our intelligence dismisses as civilian toys? They moved faster than our convoys despite the terrible roads. I'm beginning to suspect our intelligence reports may be optimistic. Richter's diary was not unique. Throughout the North African campaign, German logistics officers were confronting an uncomfortable reality. The supposedly inferior American trucks were outperforming German vehicles by every practical measure. But the German High Command had an explanation for this. The Americans, they reasoned, were simply replacing their trucks faster than they broke down. It was wasteful, inefficient, and totally American. Throwing money and resources at a problem instead of solving it with proper engineering. When those supply lines were cut, when American industrial production could no longer simply ship replacement vehicles, the weakness of their system would be exposed. This analysis made perfect sense, and it was completely wrong. What the Germans didn't understand was that the American trucks rarely needed replacing because they were designed from the ground up for field maintenance. Every single component was standardized. Every bolt was the same size. Every part could be swapped between trucks without modification. A mechanic didn't need specialized training, just basic tools and common sense. Sergeant Michael Patterson, with a maintenance supervisor with the 3rd Armored Division, demonstrated this in a legendary incident in the Sicilian campaign in July 1943. When his repair depot was hit by German artillery and lost all their specialized equipment, Patterson kept his company's trucks running using nothing but a standard toolbox, some wire, and parts cannibalized from a destroyed truck. I had one truck with a blown engine, one with a destroyed transmission, and one that had been hit by shrapnel through the cab. In a German unit, those would have been 3 total losses requiring factory replacement. I spent 6 hours and built one working truck from the 3 wrecks. The Germans were designing vehicles that required German precision engineering to fix. We were designing vehicles that any farm kid who ever worked on a tractor could keep running with baling wire and determination. By the fall of 1943, the American military had over 400,000 trucks operating in the European and Mediterranean theaters. The Germans had roughly 75,000, and that number was dropping every month as Allied bombing raids destroyed German factories and supply lines made it impossible to deliver replacement parts. But raw numbers didn't tell the whole story. The real revolution was happening in how those trucks were being used.
The Red Ball Express began operations on August 25, 1944, 3 months after D-Day. It was named after a railroad term for high-priority freight, and it would become the largest trucking operation in military history up to that point. The mission was simple in concept, but staggering in execution. Supply General George Patton's Third Army as it raced across France toward Germany. The numbers were insane. At its peak, the Red Ball Express operated 5,958 trucks driven by 23,000 men, 75% of them African-American soldiers who'd been relegated to supply duties due to the Army segregation policies. These men would prove that logistics could be just as heroic as frontline combat. Captain Richard Walsh commanded a truck company in the Red Ball Express. In his unpublished memoir, written in 1967 and donated to the Army Heritage Center in 1994, he described the operation. We were told to move 12,500 tons of supplies per day from the Normandy beaches to forward dumps near the front lines. The distance was 400 miles. Round trip,
800 miles. The roads were bombed out, congested with refugee civilians, and under occasional German air attack. Our trucks were loaded beyond capacity. Our drivers were running on 3 hours of sleep, and we were told this was temporary, just until the ports were captured and operational. It wasn't temporary. It ran for 82 days straight. At the peak, we were moving 15,000 tons per day. 15,000 tons on roads that hadn't been designed for that kind of traffic, using trucks the Germans had dismissed as toys. And we did it. For 82 consecutive days, we kept Patton's army supplied with fuel, ammunition, and food. Without the Red Ball Express, the advance across France stops dead. Period. German military intelligence observed this operation and simply couldn't believe what they were seeing. Oberst Heinrich Müller, chief intelligence officer for OB West, the German command responsible for defending Western Europe, filed a report on September 10, 1944, that read like he was describing something from science fiction. Allied truck movements observed on French roads defy conventional military logistics doctrine. Continuous convoys operating day and night with intervals of less than 100 meters between vehicles. Estimated 3,000-plus trucks observed on single route within a 24-hour period. This level of motor transport concentration should result in catastrophic traffic congestion and breakdown rates, yet Allied supply lines continue to function. Either our observation data is flawed, or the Americans have achieved a logistics capability we cannot match with current Wehrmacht resources. Müller was a career intelligence officer. He wasn't prone to hyperbole. And he was watching something that shouldn't have been possible happen right in front of him. The Germans had experience with large-scale truck operations. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of Soviet Union, had employed massive motorized logistics. But German truck convoys moved in controlled, disciplined formations with proper spacing, regular maintenance intervals, and careful traffic management. What the Americans were doing looked like chaos. Trucks jammed nose to tail, drivers operating on minimal sleep, vehicles running until they literally couldn't run anymore. And somehow it worked. It worked better than the German system. The explanation was elegantly simple. The Americans could afford to break trucks because they had so many trucks. If a GMC broke down on the Red Ball route, the driver pulled to the side, the next truck in line pushed it off the road, and the convoy kept moving. A maintenance crew would come along, fix it in a few hours with standardized parts, and get it back in service. Total downtime, maybe 6 hours. When a German Opel Blitz broke down, it required a specialized recovery vehicle, transportation to a proper repair depot, diagnosis by a trained mechanic, and parts that might take weeks to arrive from Germany, if they arrived at all. Total downtime? Weeks or months. Sergeant James Colbert experienced this firsthand during a run in September 1944.
And there was my truck, back on the road with a new engine running fine. The maintenance guys had swapped the entire engine in maybe 4 hours. They told me they were averaging 12 engine swaps a day. 12! The Germans couldn't do 1 engine swap that fast, and we were doing a dozen. This was the secret the Germans never grasped. Reliability doesn't mean never breaks. Reliability means easy to fix when it breaks. The GMC truck had a mean time between failures of about 10,000 miles under combat conditions. Not great by peacetime standards. But it could be completely rebuilt in under 8 hours using parts that were in stock at every supply depot. The Opel Blitz had a higher MTBF, around 15,000 miles, but required 3 days and specialized parts to repair when it did break down. In a war of attrition, the American approach was devastatingly superior. By October 1944, the strategic situation in Western Europe had evolved into something the German General Staff had never anticipated. Their defensive strategy was based on the assumption that Allied advances would be limited by logistics, that even if American and British forces broke through German lines, they'd outrun their supply lines and be forced to halt. This was standard military doctrine going back to Napoleon.
Armies could only advance as far as their supply lines could reach. The Germans had built their entire defensive strategy around this iron law of warfare. Except the Americans were rewriting that law with trucks. General Patton's Third Army advanced 600 miles in 30 days during August and September 1944. 600 miles in 30 days. This should have been impossible. The logistics textbooks said it was impossible. The Germans were absolutely certain it was impossible. And yet it happened because Patton had 20,000 trucks feeding his advance. General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein, commanding the Panzer Division, watched this advance from the German side and struggled to comprehend what he was seeing. In his post-war interrogation by American intelligence officers in May 1945, he was asked about the moment he realized Germany would lose the war. It was not when the Allies landed in Normandy. It was not when we lost at Falaise. It was in late September 1944 when I observed an American supply convoy near Metz. I counted the trucks for over an hour. I stopped counting at 800. 800 trucks in a single convoy, and this was just one convoy on one road. At that moment, I understood that we were not fighting an army. We were fighting an industrial system that could produce faster than we could destroy. Our panzers were magnificent machines. Our soldiers were the best trained in the world. But none of that mattered against an enemy who could simply drown us in trucks. This was the moment of realization that would spread throughout the German officer corps in the winter of 1944-1945. They weren't losing to superior tactics or better soldiers. They were losing to logistics. Boring, unglamorous, mocked by everyone logistics. The ultimate proof came during the Battle of the Bulge, Germany's last major offensive in the West. The German plan for Operation Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, was audacious and on paper brilliant. Concentrate 3 entire armies, nearly 500,000 men and 1,400 tanks for a surprise assault through the Ardennes Forest. Break through the weak American lines, drive to Antwerp and cut off the Allied armies in Belgium and the Netherlands. Force the Allies to negotiate a settlement, or at least buy time to deal with the advancing Soviets in the East. The plan had one critical assumption. German forces would capture American fuel depots in the first 48 hours. The panzers were starting the offensive with barely enough fuel to reach their initial objectives. They needed to capture American supplies to continue the advance. The planners knew this was risky, but they'd examined Allied logistics and determined it was feasible. After all, the Americans were relying on those simple, mass-produced trucks. How much fuel could they really have stockpiled? The answer was enough to change the course of the battle. When the German offensive began on December 16, 1944, American forces were caught by surprise and fell back in confusion. The initial phase went exactly as Germany planned. The 1st SS Panzer Division, the 12th SS Panzer Division, and the Panzer Lehr Division smashed through American positions and drove deep into the Ardennes. And then, one by one, they ran out of fuel. Hauptsturmführer Josef Diefenthal, commanding a tank company in the 1st SS Panzer Division, wrote in his combat diary on December 20, 1944, "We have advanced 35 kilometers. Our tanks are out of fuel. We were told we would capture American fuel dumps easily. We have found nothing. The Americans evacuated their supplies or destroyed them before we arrived. Our panzers sit immobilized while American trucks, those despised civilian toys, continued to move freely, bringing supplies to their forces. We cannot advance, we cannot retreat, we can only wait for fuel that will never come." Meanwhile, the American response to the German offensive showcased exactly what mass motorization could accomplish.
When news of the German breakthrough reached Allied headquarters, General Dwight Eisenhower immediately ordered the 101st Airborne Division to Bastogne, a critical road junction that the Germans needed to capture. The entire division, 10,000 men with equipment, had to be moved over 100 miles to Bastogne before German forces arrived. The move was accomplished in less than 24 hours using 380 trucks. Colonel William Roberts, who coordinated the movement, later described it as organized chaos that somehow worked. Trucks were pulled from every available unit. Drivers who'd been asleep were woken up and given map coordinates. There was no time for careful planning or proper organization. They just loaded everyone into trucks and started driving. The 101st Airborne reached Bastogne on December 18th, dug in, and held the town against everything the Germans could throw at them. But holding a position is meaningless if you can't supply it. Bastogne was surrounded by German forces. The roads were cut. By every conventional measure, the 101st should have been starved out within days. Instead, they were supplied by a combination of airdrops and the most audacious trucking operation of the war. Captain Robert Henshaw, the same officer from our opening, commanded a provisional truck company assigned to what was euphemistically called supply interdiction runs. The actual description was simpler: drive trucks loaded with ammunition and medical supplies through German-held territory to Bastogne. In his after-action report dated January 15, 1945, Henshaw described the operation. "We were not under any illusions about the danger. We were driving soft-skinned trucks through areas where German panzers were operating. We had no armor, limited armaments, and our only advantage was speed and surprise. The first run we lost 2 trucks to German fire, but we got through with 45 trucks carrying 90 tons of ammunition. The 101st was down to 3 rounds per artillery piece. We kept them in the fight. We made 4 more runs over the next week. Each time German opposition increased. Each time we pushed through. Not because we were particularly brave or skilled, but because we had trucks. If we lost 5 trucks, we came back with 10. If we lost 10, we came back with 20. The Germans could destroy individual trucks, but they couldn't stop the flow. There were always more trucks." This was the nightmare scenario German planners had never anticipated. They designed an offensive based on capturing supplies from an enemy who they assumed would have limited logistics capacity. Instead, they'd encountered an enemy who could lose vehicles by the hundreds and simply send more. By December 24, 1944, the German offensive had stalled completely, not because of American firepower or tactical brilliance, but because the panzers were out of fuel. Meanwhile, American forces surrounded at Bastogne were being supplied by continuous truck convoys that treated German positions as minor obstacles rather than impenetrable barriers. Major General Otto Rehmer, commanding the Führer-Begleit Brigade, watched American truck convoys rolling through supposedly German-controlled territory and understood that the war was lost. In his post-war memoir published in 1951, before he became associated with neo-Nazi movements, he wrote, "We could destroy 10 American trucks and 20 more would appear. We could block one road and they would use another. We had superior tanks, superior soldiers, and superior training, but we were fighting an enemy whose logistics system was so vast, so resilient, and so simple that there was no way to stop it. I watched a single American truck take damage from our 88mm gun, keep driving with a tire completely destroyed, deliver its cargo, and drive back to their lines. The driver probably reported it as a minor inconvenience. One of our Opel trucks would have been a total loss. That is why we lost the war." The statistics from the Battle of the Bulge support this assessment. During the battle, American forces operated approximately 35,000 trucks in the immediate combat zone. German forces had roughly 4,000 trucks still operational by late December, and most of those couldn't move because they lacked fuel. American trucks moved 1.2 million tons of supplies during the month-long battle. German forces received less than 150,000 tons, despite their shorter supply lines.
The Americans were moving 8 times more supplies across longer distances using vehicles the Germans had dismissed as inferior. By December 24, 1944, the German offensive had stalled completely, not because they were defeated in combat, but because they were strangled by logistics, or more precisely, by their lack of logistics compared to the American truck fleet. The final irony came in March 1945 when American forces crossed the Rhine and began the final advance into Germany. Forward elements of the 3rd Armored Division discovered an abandoned German logistics depot near Remagen. Inside were dozens of Opel Blitz trucks, perfectly maintained and in excellent condition, sitting idle because there was no fuel to run them and no parts to fix the few minor issues they had. Sitting next to them were 3 captured American GMC trucks that the Germans were using. They were battered, covered in hasty repairs, and had clearly seen hard use, but they were running. The Germans had kept the captured American trucks operational while their own superior engineered vehicles sat useless. Sergeant Donald Murphy, who discovered the depot, put it best in a letter to his family dated March 15, 1945. He wrote, "We found a bunch of German trucks that looked like they just rolled out of a factory, beautiful machines, and they wouldn't start. Next to them were our own trucks, beat to hell, held together with wire and hope, and they fired right up. The Germans spent the war laughing at our trucks. Turns out the joke was on them."
The final statistical reckoning of the American truck program didn't emerge until after the war, when researchers gained access to both American and German military archives. What they discovered was a disparity so enormous that it fundamentally changed how military strategists understood modern warfare. Between 1940 and 1945, American factories produced 2,382,311 military trucks. Not tanks, not aircraft, just trucks. 2,382,311 trucks. The number is so large it becomes almost meaningless until you break it down. That's 1,301 trucks per day, every single day, for 5 years straight, including Sundays, including Christmas, including every holiday and weekend. American factories were completing a new military truck every 66 seconds, 24 hours a day, for the entire duration of the war. Dr. Richard Overy, the British military historian who first compiled these production figures in his 1995 book, Why the Allies Won, put it in perspective. Germany produced approximately 345,000 military trucks during the entire war. The United States produced that many trucks every 2.5 months. This wasn't a production advantage. This was a production chasm that could not be crossed by any amount of German engineering superiority or tactical brilliance. But raw production numbers only tell part of the story. The real revolution was in how these trucks were distributed and utilized across every theater of war simultaneously. In the Pacific, American trucks were driving supplies through Philippine jungles, across Pacific Islands, and up the Burma Road into China. In Europe, they were supplying armies advancing from Normandy to Berlin. In North Africa and Italy, they were navigating mountain roads and desert tracks. In Alaska and the Aleutians, they were operating in sub-zero temperatures. In every climate, every terrain, every possible operating condition, the GMC CCKW and its variants kept running. Major General Frank Ross, who served as Chief of Transportation for the European theater, compiled a comprehensive assessment in June 1945 that was classified for 30 years before being released to the National Archives. His report included a comparison that German logistics officers would have found devastating. American motor transport moved 15.4 million tons of supplies in the European theater between June 1944 and May 1945. This is equivalent to moving the entire population of New York City, along with all their possessions, from the coast of France to central Germany. For comparison, German motor transport in the same theater during the same period moved an estimated 1.8 million tons despite operating on interior lines with shorter distances. The differential is not explained by vehicle quantity alone.
but by maintenance efficiency, parts availability, and operational doctrine that treated trucks as expendable assets rather than precious resources. The maintenance efficiency Ross mentioned was the secret weapon nobody saw coming. By 1944, the U.S. Army had established a maintenance system so efficient that it bordered on the absurd. A truck with a blown engine didn't go to a rear area depot for weeks of repair. It went to a field maintenance company that could swap the entire engine in under 6 hours. Sergeant Harold Mitchell ran one of these field maintenance operations, supporting the First Army in France. In an interview recorded for the Veterans History Project in 2003, he described the system. "We set up what we called an engine exchange depot. We'd get damaged trucks in, pull the bad engine out, drop a rebuild engine in, and send the truck back to service same day. We weren't repairing engines in the field. That's too slow. We were just swapping them like you'd change a tire. The damaged engines went back to a depot in England where they got rebuilt by civilians and shipped back to us. We kept 300 rebuild engines in stock at all times. A truck would come in dead, leave running 6 hours later. The Germans couldn't comprehend this. They were trying to repair engines in place, which took trained mechanics and 3 days minimum. We just treated the whole engine as a disposable part." This approach horrified German engineers who examined captured American maintenance facilities. Ober-engineer Wilhelm Hoffmann, a civilian engineer working for the Wehrmacht's Vehicle Procurement Office, was sent to examine a captured American maintenance depot in Belgium in October 1944. His report, discovered in German Federal Archives in 1989, dripped with professional outrage. "The American maintenance methodology is wasteful to the point of criminal negligence from an engineering standpoint. They replace entire engines rather than diagnosing and repairing specific
Failures. They discard gearboxes that could be rebuilt. They treat precision machinery as if it were disposable packaging material. And yet, I must grudgingly admit, their system works. They achieve higher vehicle availability rates than our meticulously engineered approach because they have removed the primary bottleneck, skilled labor and diagnosis time. Any moderately trained soldier can remove and replace a complete engine. This is not engineering. This is industrial brute force, and it is devastatingly effective." Hoffmann's report was filed and ignored. By October 1944, Germany had far larger problems than debating maintenance philosophy. But his assessment captured the fundamental difference in approach that decided the war's logistics battle. The Germans had designed a system that required excellence: excellent engineering, excellent mechanics, excellent parts supply. When any of those elements failed, the entire system collapsed. The Americans had designed a system that assumed everything would break and planned accordingly. When American trucks failed, the system kept functioning because failure was built into the design parameters. By early 1945, this difference had created a situation that would have seemed impossible in 1940. The German army, fighting on its own territory with the shortest possible supply lines, was immobilized by lack of transport. The American army, operating 4,000 miles from home across an ocean, had more transport capacity than it could fully utilize. Lieutenant Colonel Edwin Peterson, G4 logistics officer for the 9th Armored Division, noted this irony in his daily log dated March 3, 1945. "Received notification that our allocated truck company is being reduced by 40 vehicles because we have excess capacity. Meanwhile, intelligence reports indicate German units opposite our sector are immobilized due to lack of fuel and transport. We are giving back trucks we don't need, while the enemy cannot move for lack of vehicles. The asymmetry is so complete, it feels unsportsmanlike." This unsportsmanlike asymmetry extended to every aspect of the logistics war. American truck drivers, most of them draftees with minimal training, were outperforming German career logistics specialists simply because they had vastly superior resources. Private First Class Raymond Cooper had been a grocery delivery driver in civilian life. In March 1944, after 8 weeks of basic training, he was assigned to the 28th Infantry Division's truck company and sent to England. By September, he was driving supply runs from Normandy to forward positions near the German border.
His total military training? 8 weeks of basic infantry training and 2 days of orientation on the GMC truck. I knew how to drive a truck from my delivery job. The Army truck was basically the same, just bigger and painted green. They showed me how to do a basic maintenance check, gave me a map and said, drive to these coordinates and drop off this ammunition. That was it. No special training on military logistics or convoy operations. Just, here's a truck, here's where to go. And it worked. I made probably 200 runs between September 44 and April 45. Never lost a load, only broke down twice, and both times a maintenance crew had me running again within a few hours. Meanwhile, we'd see German trucks abandoned on the roads, perfectly good vehicles just sitting there because they didn't have parts or trained mechanics to fix minor problems. The German equivalent of Private Cooper would have been Obergefreiter Hans Weber, a transport driver with the 12th Volksgrenadier Division. Weber's training included 6 months of specialized vehicle operations school, advanced maintenance certification, and tactical transport doctrine. He was a professional military driver operating a precision-engineered vehicle. And by March 1945, he was walking, because his division's truck company had been reduced from 42 vehicles to 7 operational trucks, and those 7 couldn't move because there was no fuel. Weber's superior training and his vehicle's superior engineering meant nothing against systemic collapse. This contrast was documented in a remarkable series of interviews conducted by American military intelligence officers in May 1945. They gathered a group of German logistics officers who had surrendered and asked them to review American supply operations. The responses ranged from disbelief to professional admiration to bitter resentment. Oberstlieutenant Friedrich Reinhardt, who had commanded supply operations for the 7th Army, was shown photographs of American supply depots and convoy operations. His response, recorded in the interrogation transcript, was telling. I was trained that logistics is the most complex aspect of military operations, requiring years of study and careful planning. Looking at these American operations, they have solved the complexity problem by eliminating complexity. They don't have sophisticated allocation systems because they have enough supplies to waste. They don't have intricate maintenance schedules because they replace rather than repair. They don't have careful route planning because they have enough trucks to use multiple routes simultaneously. This is not military science. This is overwhelming abundance applied to eliminate problems rather than solve them. And I hate that it works better than our approach.
Reinhardt's assessment captured something essential. The Americans hadn't won the logistics war through superior planning or better tactics. They'd won by producing so much that planning and tactics became less critical. When you have 20,000 trucks supporting an army, losing 100 trucks to enemy action or mechanical failure is a minor inconvenience. When you have 2,000 trucks, losing 100 is a crisis. The final German attempt to counter American logistics superiority came too late and accomplished too little. In January 1945, with Allied armies approaching the Rhine and Soviet forces entering Germany from the east, the Wehrmacht's Vehicle Procurement Office made a desperate decision. They would copy American trucks. The order went out to Opel, Mercedes-Benz, and other German manufacturers. Stop production of existing military trucks and begin manufacturing simplified vehicles based on captured American designs. The goal was to achieve American-style mass production using American principles of standardization and simplicity. It was a sound decision. It was also completely futile. Generaldirektor Wilhelm von Opel, head of the Opel Company, which had been majority-owned by General Motors before the war, adding layers of irony to the situation, met with Wehrmacht procurement officers in February 1945 to discuss the plan. The minutes preserved in corporate archives revealed the hopeless reality. The Wehrmacht requests that Opel begin immediate production of a simplified truck based on American GMC specifications. Timeline: 500 units by April 1945. Opel response: this is technically impossible. American production methods required dedicated assembly lines, specialized tooling, and most critically, vast quantities of raw materials we do not possess. Our factories are operating at 30% capacity due to Allied bombing and lack of steel, rubber, and fuel. We cannot retool our remaining production to copy American designs in the time requested. We cannot produce 500 trucks by April. We can perhaps produce 50 trucks by July, if the war continues that long and if our factories are not destroyed. The war did not continue until July. Germany surrendered in May 1945, and the simplified truck program died with the Third Reich, having produced exactly 0 vehicles. But the most damning evidence of American logistics superiority came not from production numbers or operational statistics, but from what happened immediately after the war ended. When Germany surrendered, the American military had approximately 450,000 trucks in the European theater alone. These trucks had won the war in the West. They'd supplied the armies that liberated France, crossed the Rhine, and occupied Germany. They represented the largest motorized logistics operation in human history, and within 6 months, the U.S. Army was giving them away. The post-war disposal of American trucks became the stuff of legend. Trucks that had driven across Europe were sold to civilians for $50 each. Some were simply abandoned in fields across France and Germany, not worth the cost of shipping home. Others were given to European governments for reconstruction efforts. Thousands were driven into the Mediterranean and English Channel and scuttled because there were too many to process through normal disposal channels. Hans Schneider was a 19-year-old German civilian in Bavaria when American forces occupied his region in May 1945. In a 2015 interview, he recalled the surreal experience. The Americans arrived in an endless convoy of trucks, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They occupied our town, and within a week, they were parking trucks in every field, every barn, every available space. An American sergeant asked my father if he wanted to buy a truck for 50 Reichsmarks, about $5. My father thought it was a joke. The sergeant was serious. He said they had too many trucks to ship home and were selling them to anyone who wanted one. My father bought 3 trucks that day. Those trucks rebuilt our town. We used them to clear rubble, transport materials, everything. The Americans gave away more trucks in 1 week than the entire German army had in our region during the whole war. This casual disposal of enormous quantities of military equipment would have been incomprehensible to German logistics officers who had spent the war desperately trying to keep inadequate numbers of vehicles running. The Americans had so many trucks that they were throwing them away. But the real legacy of the American truck program wasn't measured in production numbers or disposal statistics. It was measured in how it changed military doctrine forever.
In August 1946, the U.S. Army War College conducted a comprehensive study of logistics operations in World War II. The classified report, declassified in 1976, concluded with a statement that would have vindicated every logistics officer who'd been mocked for focusing on boring supply issues. The war in Europe was won by trucks, not tanks. American armor was generally inferior to German armor. American infantry tactics were adequate, but not exceptional. American air power was decisive in specific operations, but did not alone determine the outcome. What determined the outcome was the ability to supply armies in the field faster than the enemy could respond. This was achieved through motor transport on a scale previously unimagined. Future military planning must recognize that logistics capacity is not a supporting element of warfare. It is the determining element. Soviet military observers reached similar conclusions. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, who commanded Soviet forces in the final assault on Berlin, was asked in a post-war interview what he considered the most important American contribution to the Allied victory. His answer surprised the interviewer. The most important things in this war were trucks, and then more trucks. Without American trucks, we would not have had anything to pull our artillery with. Without American trucks, our infantry would have walked while the Germans rode. Without American trucks, we would have starved. People speak of American tanks and aircraft, and these were important, but the war was won by American trucks.
Stalin understood this. Roosevelt understood this. Churchill understood this. Only Hitler did not understand this, and that is why he lost. Zhukov's assessment was backed by hard numbers. Under the Lend-Lease program, the United States shipped 427,000 trucks to the Soviet Union. These trucks represented the majority of Soviet motorized transport throughout the war. Soviet factories produced excellent tanks and artillery, but they never achieved the truck production necessary to move them effectively. American trucks filled that gap. The British were equally dependent. General Bernard Montgomery, commanding Allied ground forces in Northwest Europe, operated under strict American logistics control. His armies advanced when American trucks brought them supplies, and halted when truck allocations went elsewhere. Montgomery, never one to praise Americans readily, admitted in his memoirs, "I commanded British forces, but I moved on American petrol, delivered by American trucks." This was the reality of coalition warfare. The Americans had created a logistics system of such magnitude that it subsumed all other national efforts. We could not have liberated Europe without American truck production. This is not a comfortable admission for a British officer, but it is the truth. The German post-war assessment was even more direct. In 1949, a group of former Wehrmacht officers compiled a comprehensive study of why Germany lost the war, hoping to learn lessons for future German military planning. The study, titled Operational and Logistical Failures of the Wehrmacht, 1939 to 1945, devoted an entire chapter to American motor transport. The conclusion, written by General Oberst Franz Halder, former chief of the German General Staff, was brutally honest. "We lost the war in the factories of Detroit and Flint. We lost it before the first shot was fired in 1939, though we did not know it at the time. Germany designed a military for a short war of maneuver decided by superior tactics and equipment. We designed everything, our tanks, our doctrine, our entire strategy around this concept. America designed a military for industrial attrition, where victory would be achieved by outproducing the enemy. They built trucks while we built tanks, and when the war became a contest of industrial endurance, we had no answer to their trucks, none. We could build better vehicles, but we could not build enough vehicles. That was the fatal flaw in all German strategic planning." Halder's assessment became required reading in post-war military academies around the world. The lesson was clear. In modern industrial warfare, the side that could supply its forces would defeat the side with superior weapons but inferior logistics. This lesson was reinforced by what happened to captured American trucks in German service. When Wehrmacht units captured American vehicles, they desperately wanted to use them because German trucks were so scarce. But they discovered something that perfectly illustrated the philosophical gulf between American and German approaches to engineering. Lieutenant Paul Becker, a maintenance officer with the 352nd Infantry Division, recorded his experience with captured American trucks in his personal diary, now housed in the Bundesarchiv. March 1945. "We captured 6 American trucks yesterday in perfect running condition. The men were excited. We have not had adequate transport for months. I inspected the trucks and was appalled. The engineering is crude, almost primitive. The engines are simple to the point of being unsophisticated. The tolerances are loose. The materials are basic. These trucks should not work reliably, but they do work, perfectly, constantly. Our mechanics, trained on precision German vehicles, do not trust these trucks. They seem too simple, too rough. But they start every time, run all day, and require only basic maintenance. I am beginning to understand that we Germans confused sophistication with effectiveness. These simple trucks are more effective than our sophisticated ones. This is a hard lesson."
Becker's hard lesson was being learned across the Wehrmacht in early 1945. German soldiers were abandoning their own trucks in favor of captured American ones. German maintenance units were begging for captured American vehicles because they were easier to keep running than German trucks. The supposed superiority of German engineering had become a liability. The final irony came in the last weeks of the war. As Allied forces advanced into Germany, they discovered German military depots filled with captured American equipment carefully preserved for proper analysis by German engineers. Warehouses full of GMC CCKW trucks, Jeeps, and other American vehicles that had been captured earlier in the war and sent to testing facilities instead of being immediately put into service. These vehicles were found in perfect condition, thoroughly documented, measured, and analyzed. While outside the warehouse doors, German military units were immobilized for lack of transport. The German obsession with understanding American engineering had prevented them from simply using American trucks when they desperately needed any trucks at all. Captain Thomas Anderson, an American intelligence officer who inventoried these depots in May 1945, filed a report that captured the absurdity. Discovered a Wehrmacht testing facility near Munich, containing 78 American vehicles captured between 1942 and 1944. All vehicles in excellent condition, clearly maintained for engineering study. Each vehicle accompanied by detailed technical reports analyzing design, manufacturing tolerances, and operational characteristics. Meanwhile, 2 kilometers away, we found an abandoned German truck company with 23 vehicles, 19 of which were inoperable due to lack of spare parts. The Germans spent the war studying our trucks while their own army couldn't move. They analyzed when they should have been adapting. This failure to adapt became the epitaph for German logistics in World War II. They'd started the war confident in their engineering superiority and tactical brilliance. They'd ended it unable to move their armies because they lacked the unglamorous, mass-produced trucks they'd spent years mocking. The numbers tell the final story with devastating clarity. American trucks produced 2,382,311. German trucks produced 345,000. American truck operational readiness rate 92%. German truck operational readiness rate 64%. Average time to repair an American truck 8 hours. Average time to repair a German truck 96 hours. Tons of supplies moved by American trucks in Europe June 1944 to May 1945. 15.4 million. Tons of supplies moved by German trucks in the same period 1.8 million. American trucks destroyed or captured by German forces, approximately 48,000. German trucks destroyed or captured by Allied forces, approximately 127,000. Most telling of all, American trucks still in service in 1946, 427,000. German trucks still in service in 1946, 0. The war ended with America having more trucks than it had on D-Day, despite a year of intensive combat. Germany ended with no functional truck fleet at all. The Wehrmacht's transport capacity had been completely destroyed not primarily by Allied bombing or combat action, but by systemic maintenance collapse. The trucks simply stopped working, and there were no parts, no mechanics, and no infrastructure to fix them. In the final analysis, German officers had mocked American trucks as crude, unsophisticated civilian vehicles unsuited for serious military operations. They were right about the crude and unsophisticated part. They were catastrophically wrong about everything else. The GMC CCKW and its variants weren't sophisticated. They were effective. They weren't precision engineered. They were mass-produced. They weren't designed to be the best trucks possible. They were designed to be good enough trucks available in overwhelming numbers. And in the end, overwhelming numbers of good enough trucks defeated superior numbers of excellent trucks that couldn't be produced fast enough, maintained easily enough, or kept running long enough. The lesson was simple, brutal, and undeniable. In industrial warfare, logistics doesn't support combat operations. Logistics is combat operations. The side that can supply its forces wins. Everything else is commentary. German officers had spent the war laughing at American trucks. By the time they understood what those trucks actually meant, it was too late. The endless convoys had already won the war, one simple, mass-produced truck at a time. The mockery ended not with German officers admitting they were wrong, though some eventually did, but with those officers being driven to prisoner-of-war camps in American trucks, watching convoys of identical trucks moving supplies to occupy their homeland, finally understanding the joke had always been on them.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.